In the 1950s, Monroe, North Carolina was drowning in terror. The Ku Klux Klan burned crosses in the night, fired guns into black neighborhoods, and rode through the streets unchecked while police turned a blind eye. Families who had lived there for generations knew the routine. Keep your head down, hope the night riders passed by, and pray no one got dragged from their home. But then came a man who refused to bow to that fear. He had worn the uniform of a U.S. Marine, returned to the South with discipline in his blood, and carried a conviction that his people would not live on their knees. When the Klan came for his community, he stood ready. His decision would change everything, forcing even the most violent racists to retreat. His name was Robert F. Williams, and his story terrified the KKK itself. Robert F. Williams was born in 1925 and grew up under the harsh thumb of Jim Crow segregation. From early on, he understood the brutality Black Americans faced. When he was only 11, Williams witnessed a horrific incident that left an indelible mark. A white police officer named Jesse Helms Sr. mercilessly beat a black woman on a Monroe Street, then dragged her bleeding form to jail. That officer, the father of a future U.S. Senator, personified the racist violence ingrained in Monroe's culture, showing young Robert exactly what his people were up against. Williams' own family history further steeled him. His grandmother had been born into slavery, and his grandparents believed in defending themselves. They even entrusted him with his first rifle as a boy. Growing up hearing stories of enslavement and resistance, Williams developed a fiery determination never to accept abuse. As his son Frank later put it, Robert wasn't going to take that treatment anymore. In his late teens, Williams joined the wave of black Southerners heading north for better opportunities, landing in Detroit during World War II. There, he labored in auto factories and witnessed the 1943 Detroit race riot, a violent clash sparked by racist tensions. Soon after, he was drafted into the segregated U.S. Marine Corps. He served his country, but faced discrimination within the ranks, an experience that deepened his resolve to fight for dignity at home. By the late 1940s, Williams returned to Monroe with a broadened perspective and a wife, Mabel, who shared his passion for justice. Together, they channeled their experiences into local activism. Back in Monroe, Williams found a community in dire need of change. The small city was a KKK stronghold, and by some accounts, nearly half of Monroe's white population belonged to the Klan. The town even served as headquarters for the KKK's Southeastern Brigade. The Klan paraded openly, wielding terror to keep black residents in their place. Local officials and police officers were often complicit, turning a blind eye or even participating in the racist violence. This wasn't just the Klan as we think of them, Frank Williams recalled. It was even officials and everyone else there, fueling the oppression. In this atmosphere, simply demanding basic rights could be life-threatening. Williams refused to be intimidated. In the early 1950s, he became active in the Monroe branch of the NAACP and soon rose to president of the chapter. At a time when advocating for civil rights in the Deep South invited violent backlash, Williams started achieving small but symbolic victories. He led local campaigns to integrate public facilities that black taxpayers funded but were barred from using. Under his leadership, Monroe's public library was successfully integrated, allowing black patrons entry for the first time. Emboldened, Williams next targeted the city's swimming pool, a segregated tax-supported pool where black children were prohibited. In 1957, he organized peaceful pickets at the pool gates to demand equal access. This act of protest would prove to be a turning point. The reaction was swift and vicious. Crowds of angry whites jeered at the black demonstrators, and soon the confrontation escalated far beyond taunts. Gunshots cracked through the air as segregationists opened fire on the unarmed picketers. Bullets sent protesters scrambling for cover. Incredibly, no one was killed, and police on the scene did nothing to stop the attackers. The message was clear. In Monroe, even nonviolent protests for basic rights would be met with deadly force. For Williams, this was the final straw. Everyone knew the shots came from the Klan, he noted, and indeed many of Monroe's officers and civic leaders were likely in the Klan's ranks. If the law would not protect peaceful citizens from violence, Williams concluded that black citizens would have to protect themselves. Rather than back down, Robert F. Williams responded to the pool shooting by doubling down on self-defense. He held fast to a simple but radical idea. Black Americans had as much right as anyone to defend their lives and homes, especially when the authorities refused to do so. In late 1957, Williams took a dramatic step. He applied to the National Rifle Association and obtained a charter for a Monroe NRA Rifle Club, unheard of for a black community in the South at that time. Williams proudly dubbed the group the Black Armed Guard. He recruited about 60 black men, many fellow military veterans like himself, and began rigorous firearms training. These men pledged to shield their neighborhoods from KKK night riders and would not fire a shot unless they or their families were attacked. The very existence of an organized armed black defense group was shocking and unprecedented in North Carolina. It was a direct challenge to Klan domination, and Williams knew it could invite retaliation, but he also believed it was the only way to prevent another tragedy. That retaliation came sooner than expected. By summer 1957, word spread that the Klan was plotting a major attack on a local black leader's home. Dr. Albert E. Perry, a black physician and vice president of the Monroe NAACP, was marked as a target. Perry's home sat in Newtown, the black residential section that Klan caravans often terrorized at night. When Williams learned of the KKK's plans, he and the Black Armed Guard sprang into action. They fortified Dr. Perry's modest house, stacking sandbags beneath the windows and setting up defensive positions inside. As daylight faded, dozens of armed black men took up posts around the property, rifles in hand. Some were perched at windows, others crouched behind makeshift barricades in the yard. Their hearts pounded in the darkness as they awaited the Klan onslaught, unsure if this standoff would end in bloodshed. Late one night, the KKK finally arrived in force. A caravan of cars and trucks filled with robed Klansmen crept into the neighborhood with headlights off. Without warning, the attackers opened fire, spraying bullets into Dr. Perry's home from the road. Windows shattered as gunfire poured in, but this time the Klan's barrage was answered. Williams and his men returned fire from within the house, muzzle flashes lighting up the night. The quiet Monroe Street erupted into a battle. Shots whizzed in both directions, splintering wood and pinging off car metal. Facing an unexpected hail of bullets from their would-be victims, the Klansmen panicked. In a matter of moments, the attackers sped away in retreat, overwhelmed that the people they had long menaced were shooting back. It was over almost as soon as it began. Incredibly, no one on the defense was killed. The Klan, so bold when unopposed, didn't have any more stomach for this type of fight, Williams later said. That night, the Black Armed Guard had repelled the KKK and protected their community. The impact of this victory was seismic. For the first time in local memory, the Klan had been beaten at their own game. Cross burnings and night rides abruptly ceased in Monroe's black neighborhoods after the Perry House shootout. The notorious terrorists were now afraid to venture into Newtown. Equally significant was the response of Monroe's city fathers. These were the same officials who had previously defended the KKK's right to rally and intimidate. But once they saw armed black citizens ready to answer violence with violence, their tune changed. The very next day, the city council convened an emergency session. In an astonishing reversal, Monroe's leaders passed an ordinance banning KKK motorcades and rallies without a special permit. Essentially, they told the Klan to stand down for your own safety, as Williams's son put it. The sight of black men willing to sacrifice their lives to protect their families had shaken the white power structure to its core. They said these blacks are starting to fight back, so no more Klan drive-bys anymore. Frank Williams recounted, describing the begrudging white concern for public safety now that bullets might fly both ways. Robert Williams became a legend virtually overnight. Local black residents, who had lived in fear for so long, felt a new sense of pride and security. The man who led them in self-defense was not a big, imposing figure. He was a soft-spoken Marine veteran with a scholarly air, but in their eyes he became a hero. Yet, to the white establishment, Williams was now seen as a dangerous agitator. The fact that he had dared arm black citizens was scandalous enough, but that he had actually forced the KKK to flee was simply unthinkable. News of the Monroe Showdown spread quietly through black communities across the South. However, the mainstream media largely ignored the story, enforcing a near-total blackout outside of Monroe. Williams noted bitterly that white-owned newspapers did not want black people elsewhere to get the impression that this was an accepted way to deal with the Klan. Even some moderate black leaders reacted with discomfort. The prevailing civil rights strategy was nonviolent resistance, as championed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., meeting hate with love rather than with guns. Williams's approach threatened to upend that narrative, and it put him on a collision course with the NAACP's national leadership. Despite criticism, Williams stood firm that self-defense was not aggression. He explained that he did not advocate violence for its own sake, nor seek revenge against whites. He only insisted on the right to meet force with force when necessary to save lives. As he succinctly put it, racists consider themselves superior beings and are not willing to exchange their superior lives for our inferior ones. If black people armed themselves, he argued, white supremacists would think twice about attacking, and that prediction had proven true in Monroe. In Williams' view, where the law is unable or unwilling to enforce order, the citizens must act in self-defense against lawless violence. This philosophy of armed self-reliance resonated with many ordinary black Southerners who knew the terror of the Klan firsthand. By 1959, Williams's Monroe NAACP branch had gained a reputation as the most militant in the South. It was a reputation paid for in blood and bullets, and one that gave hope to black communities far beyond North Carolina. While arming for protection, Robert F. Williams also continued to fight for justice through advocacy and publicity. In late 1958, he took up the cause of two black children in Monroe caught in the crossfire of Southern racism. That fall, a routine, playful gesture turned into a nightmare known as the kissing case. A white girl innocently pecked two little black boys, ages 7 and 9, on the cheek while they were playing together. When the white child's mother discovered this, she exploded with outrage. Local authorities responded with disproportionate fury. The two black boys were arrested and brutally beaten in custody, then convicted of molestation and sentenced to years in a reformatory. The sheer injustice was staggering. Williams was outraged and sprang into action, forming the Committee to Combat Racial Injustice and rallying support for the boys. He publicized their plight far and wide, reaching northern liberal circles, international media, and even the desk of North Carolina's governor. Under intense pressure and worldwide embarrassment, Governor Luther Hodges relented. In 1959, after months of protest, the young boys were freed and granted clemency. The kissing case made headlines around the globe, revealing how grotesque Jim Crow justice could be, even for children. It also elevated Williams' profile as a civil rights advocate who would go to any lengths, including shaming his country on the world stage, to defend his people. To Monroe's white power structure, this was another unforgivable offense. Robert Williams had aired the town's dirty laundry internationally, reinforcing his image as a troublemaker in their eyes. But to black Americans and humanitarians worldwide, he was a champion for voiceless children. Williams's activism did not stop there. He founded a newsletter called The Crusader, which he used to write fiery editorials highlighting racial violence and urging black readership to stand up for their rights. He also worked with local NAACP NAACP members on integrating other public spaces and securing equal treatment under the law. Yet at every turn, the Monroe establishment and the Klan sought to harass and undermine him. For example, once Williams's activities became prominent, his car insurance policy was abruptly canceled. Insurers claimed his vehicle had been repeatedly stoned by night riders, making it too risky to cover. It was an underhanded tactic to restrict his movement and punish his outspokenness. Undeterred, Williams pressed on. The more Williams achieved, the more backlash he faced from those uncomfortable with a black man wielding such influence, including some within the civil rights movement. The breaking point came in 1959 after yet another miscarriage of justice in Monroe. That year, a black woman named Mary Reed, who was pregnant, was attacked and raped by two white men. Despite clear evidence of their guilt, an all-white jury acquitted the accused. Outside the courthouse, having seen enough of Southern justice, Robert Williams exploded in anger. Surrounded by black citizens still reeling from the verdict, he delivered an impromptu speech that would become infamous. "We cannot rely on the law. We must meet violence with violence," Williams declared passionately. If the courts would not protect black women from rapists and lynchers, he argued, then perhaps black people would have to protect themselves by any means necessary, even if that meant lynching their oppressors in return. His words were a cry of frustration, born of repeated injustices, and he insisted later that he was urging self-defense, not encouraging chaos. But the phrase, "meet violence with violence," hit the newswires like a lightning bolt. For foes of civil rights, it was proof of their worst fears, a black leader openly threatening whites. For the NAACP's cautious national leadership, it was a public relations disaster. The NAACP had always promoted nonviolence and faith in the legal system, no matter how flawed. Williams's statement, splashed across headlines and even quoted in the Harvard Crimson, seemed to call for vigilantism, which horrified white liberals and conservative black leaders alike. Bowing to pressure, the NAACP suspended Williams from his presidency later in 1959, distancing themselves from his militant stance. Williams was disappointed but unrepentant. He clarified that he did not literally advocate lynching white people. His dramatic language was meant to convey that black Americans could not passively watch their families be murdered. Nonetheless, the damage was done, and he had alienated powerful allies. Even future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, then an NAACP attorney, quietly fed information about Williams to J. Edgar Hoover's FBI around this time, reflecting how divisive Williams' approach had become in some circles. Yet on the ground in Monroe, black residents largely stood by Williams. They knew the context of his remark, and, more importantly, they knew the man. He was the neighbor who had trained them to shoot for self-protection, the activist who got their children pardoned from unjust punishment, the leader who defended their homes from night riders. To them, Williams was not a villain, but a protector and truth-teller. His stance, controversial to elites, felt perfectly logical to people who had endured unchecked white violence for generations. In Williams's own succinct explanation, "I believe in nonviolent tactics where feasible, but where there is a breakdown of the law, the individual citizen has a right to protect his person, his family, his home, and his property." This blunt insistence on a black American's right to life and liberty was radical for its time. By 1960, Robert F. Williams stood at a crossroads. He was increasingly sidelined from the mainstream civil rights movement due to his militant views, yet he remained a folk hero to grassroots activists who felt nonviolence alone could not solve their predicament. The looming question was how far Williams would go, and how far the forces opposing him would go to stop him. That answer would come in 1961, amidst one of the most tumultuous chapters of the Southern freedom struggle, pushing Williams out of Monroe and onto the international stage. In 1961, the freedom struggle literally arrived on Robert Williams' doorstep. That summer, interracial groups of freedom riders, activists challenging segregated interstate travel, decided to stage protests in Monroe. Williams, despite his break with the NAACP, welcomed these young riders to town and offered the Monroe black community's support. Tension was already high. The KKK and local white supremacists seethed at the idea of outside agitators stirring up trouble. Over several weeks in August 1961, the Freedom Riders' presence sparked daily confrontations. White mobs harassed and assaulted the nonviolent protesters, while Monroe police imposed harsh restrictions on the picketing, even dictating absurd rules about how far apart demonstrators had to stand. With each passing day, the situation grew more volatile. Williams had his black guard on standby to defend the neighborhoods if things got out of hand. Violence soon exploded. On August 27, 1961, a massive white mob, reportedly thousands of angry segregationists from surrounding counties, descended on Monroe's Courthouse Square, where freedom riders and local black residents were gathered. Clashes erupted throughout the town. Cars were overturned, fists were thrown, and gunshots rang out as marauding whites attacked any black people they could find. Police and National Guard units swarmed in, claiming to restore order, but their sympathies often lay with the white crowds. In the chaos of that day, an incident occurred that authorities would use to try to destroy Robert Williams. A white couple from out of town, driving through Monroe, took a wrong turn and found themselves amid an enraged crowd in the black part of town. This couple, a man and his wife, had reportedly been seen a day earlier joining local racists with a vile banner that read, "Open season on coons," though they later claimed to have stumbled in by accident. Tempers in the black neighborhood were raw, and residents thought this was an attack. The couple's car was quickly surrounded by an angry throng. Fearing for their safety if things spiraled, Williams intervened and brought them into his own house. He intended to shield them from the mob outside, the same way he would hope a decent person might protect a black family in reverse. The couple remained inside for a couple of hours, unharmed, and eventually slipped away to safety once the crowds dissipated. But in the poisonous racial atmosphere of 1961, Williams' act of mercy was twisted into something sinister. Local police, embarrassed by the unrest and eager to pin blame, falsely accused Williams of kidnapping the white couple. Although the couple themselves later stated they never felt kidnapped, the accusation stuck. That evening, Williams learned that the police chief intended to have him lynched under cover of darkness, a chilling threat delivered through intermediaries. Realizing that he and his family were in imminent danger, Williams made the painful decision to flee Monroe. He kissed his wife Mabel and their children, hastily packed a few belongings, and under the cover of night, the Williams family slipped out of town, leaving behind their home, friends, and everything they had built. They believed it would be a temporary retreat until things cooled down. They were wrong. Within 24 hours, the local authorities, aided by the FBI, doubled down on their version of events. The FBI issued a warrant for Robert Williams, accusing him of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution on kidnapping charges. Hoover's FBI portrayed Williams as a dangerous militant, even going so far as to label him a schizophrenic in internal bulletins. They wanted to make an example of the black man who had defied the Klan. With state and federal charges hanging over him, Williams had few safe havens in the United States. The family made their way north, narrowly avoiding capture, and crossed into Canada. From there, in a move that seemed straight out of a Cold War novel, Robert and Mabel Williams secured passage to Cuba, which offered them asylum. In October 1961, Robert F. Williams, once a hometown NAACP president, became a political exile. Far from silencing him, Exile gave Williams a new platform. In Cuba, he was greeted as a fellow fighter against American imperialism. Fidel Castro's government provided him resources to continue his advocacy from abroad. Williams quickly set up a radio show called Radio Free Dixie. Beginning in 1962, his powerful voice could be heard crackling over shortwave airwaves, broadcasting nightly from Havana into the American South. On Radio Free Dixie, Williams spoke directly to Black Americans still suffering under segregation. He mixed militant, impassioned commentary with blues and jazz music, creating a program that both entertained and incited. He reported on racial injustices ignored by American media, celebrated acts of Black resistance, and urged African Americans to demand their freedom by any means necessary. As the Cuban Missile Crisis heated up in 1962, Williams even used the broadcast to implore Black American soldiers not to fight for the United States against Cuba, suggesting they should instead turn their guns against their oppressors at home. Such rhetoric made him a major thorn in the side of the U.S. government, but for many in the civil rights and emerging Black Power movements, Williams was a beacon who spoke the plain truth about American racism on an international stage. While in Cuba, Williams also kept up his writing. In 1962, he published Negro with Guns, the seminal book chronicling his experiences in Monroe and laying out the case for armed self-defense. Part memoir, part manifesto, it would later deeply inspire young Black radicals, including Huey P. Newton, who cited Williams as a forefather of the Black Panther Party, and others seeking a more assertive path to equality. Williams networked with leaders of independence movements and communist countries, traveling to China in the mid-1960s, where he met Mao Zedong and found common cause in anti-imperialist solidarity. Everywhere he went, he spoke not just for himself, but for the millions of Black Americans whose plight he likened to colonial subjects yearning to be free. In Beijing and Hanoi, in Havana and Moscow, Robert Williams spread the message that America's racial issue was a global human rights issue. As the 1960s progressed, Williams longed to return home. The civil rights landscape had evolved. The violent repression of peaceful protesters in the South had radicalized a new generation of activists. By the late 1960s, slogans of Black Power echoed from Mississippi to Oakland, and groups like the Black Panthers openly carried arms for community self-defense, all vindicating Williams's earlier stance. In 1969, after nearly 8 years abroad, Williams cautiously came back to the United States. He settled in Michigan, far from the South, and immediately sought to clear his name legally. It took several years of legal battles and support from allies, including even some white civil libertarians, before North Carolina finally dropped the false kidnapping charges. In 1976, the state acknowledged it had no case. The main witness against him had recanted or become too unreliable, and Robert Williams was officially vindicated. He was free to go home. By then, the world had changed, and so had Williams. He chose to live quietly in Michigan with his family, rather than pursue a high-profile role in the growing Black Power movement. Ill health eventually slowed him down, but not before he continued to mentor activists, write, and reflect on the movement he helped ignite. In his later years, Williams saw many of his ideas entering the mainstream of Black political thought, even as he remained relatively unsung. But those who knew the history understood his significance. When Robert F. Williams died in 1996 at age 71, tributes poured in from those he had inspired. At his funeral in Monroe, one especially iconic civil rights figure delivered a heartfelt eulogy. Rosa Parks, the mother of the Montgomery bus boycott, honored Williams for his courage and his commitment to freedom, proclaiming that the sacrifices he made and what he did should go down in history and never be forgotten. Indeed, Williams' legacy lived on in the Deacons for Defense who organized armed Black self-defense in the 1960s Deep South, in the Black Panthers' militant posture, and in every Black American who ever stood their ground against racist aggression. He had shown that sometimes standing up to terror is the only way to end it. Robert F. Williams was, in the truest sense, the black man who terrified the KKK. But he did not set out to be an instrument of fear. He set out to protect his family and community when no one else would. In doing so, he exposed the cowardice of bullies who could not stomach risk to themselves, and he forced a nation to question whether it would heed calls for justice or drive people to take up arms in desperation. Williams's story is both extraordinary and fundamentally American, a testament to the lengths one man would go to secure dignity, safety, and freedom for his people. His fight, waged with both the pen and the gun, remains a powerful reminder that progress has often come not only from those who preached love, but also from those who, when pushed to the brink, were willing to meet violence with selfless courage. If you found this history as important as we do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our stories into Black history. Share this video to keep the memory of fighters like Williams alive. And, as always, thank you for watching Black Culture Unlocked. We'll see you in the next video.